All right, finally, just to finish up here, I think that you're onto something, but the exact principles that you were talking about, as far as what objects are, or what which are basically, what you're saying are three kind of the organizing principles of Gestalt psychology. Uh, but robustness, um, you know, having being sturdy, or like having a durational structure, over time, and well-formedness, or uh, saliency, contrast from a figure on a background. Um, I think that the yes/no thing is the constituted domain of what the self is, the highest level of abstraction. Whereas what I would be interested in also is the constituting domain. What is constituting this yes/no boundary? Because, like I said before, you have to have some basis or foundation or history or familiarity with the world, at least, in order to give answers, meaningful answers, that could designate a boundary to these yes/no questions. You have to have, like I was saying with Hegel, like Hegel was saying, uh, I think I have written down here somewhere what he said. He says, yeah, I have it right here. Um, you know, it's central to his dialectic is this idea. Let's see here. It's right here. So this won't take very long. Um, yeah. So I mean, he's talking about the master and the slave, and the master intends to do something, and then what he actually achieves is quite different. So the master intends to achieve his autonomy and recognition of himself as free self-consciousness, in being a master, in his mastership over the slave. But this is what he intends. What he actually achieves is actually a form of slavery itself. He becomes a slave in the sense that he becomes dependent on his slave. Um, so what you might intend to do with these yes/no demarcations, quite different from what you actually achieve in doing them, or what you purport to achieve is different from what you actually intend in a lot of cases. I don't mean intend in the sense of like a definite volitional decision, but as far as the directionality of your behavior, the intentionality of your behavior. You might purport to be one kind of person, and then in matter of fact, and throughout the day-to-day mundane grind of experience, you're not at all like that, or vice versa. Um, okay, so but the really important thing about what Hegel is saying is talking about sense certainty in Phenomenology of Spirit, is in his first opening section, and he says that the advocate of sense certainty, they intend to single out these objects, right? They intend to single out, he says, quote, actual things, external or sensible objects, absolutely individual, real, and so on. But while um, while they intend to while we intend to isolate these particular things, particular objects, like you said, that are so the prototypical objects we would think about, in their essential particularity, um, we end up, he says, they end up referring to what is simply universal, and he's really making the same kind of argument that Wittgenstein was saying. He said, you know, we might think of a language game as language as basically an ostensive thing, pointing to individual objects and stuff. But that's not, really the basis of learning language. It's not going around naming things, naming well-formed objects and whatnot. You can only name well-formed objects after you have this whole set of an understanding, familiarity with the world. Um, while you might intend with your ideas, or with, in general, you might intend to establish a foundation for the self. Uh, what you succeed in showing is that, I mean, that this foundation already presupposes a mastery of whole other set of norms and basically language itself is language I don't think is separable from the norms and the that go into how to use language and certain in the right context, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, I've gone on long enough. I just hope that I've said some things that could be useful or helpful here. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of something like what Daniel Stern would call uh, vitality contours, and what you were saying about understanding the temporal shape of someone's behavior. These kinds of ideas about contours might be, that are more dynamic, uh, might be better to get for getting at what really shapes was the real foundation for the self. And I think, but maybe you are onto something when it comes to really the highest level of abstraction of talking about, um, when you are really like saying like, what kind of person are you, and you're questioning their self in essence. Then, you know, they have to be consistent with their answers, yes and no. Are you this kind of person? That's when the concern for the lack of ambiguity, the concern for a coherent world picture comes into view is when you really come under the spotlight. But you have to have a whole history and a whole other set of conditions, or a whole other situation already formed in order to found uh, in order to found anything like that, um, upon that foundation, that original foundation of the self. So I think the self and interaction is the most important part. I mean, how does an infant really come to understand their self as a me, as opposed to an I, as really as a you know uh, George Herbert Mead would say. How does that happen? Well, Vishnu Reddy, let's see if I have her book here somewhere. Well, Vishnu Reddy wrote a book called How Infants Know Minds, and it just came out in 2008. And she talks about how being the object of attention in certain contexts literally is what forms the object of the objective referential, something that can be referred to objectively. Um, that's, as you say, the same over many situations. Um, being the object of attention, wanting attention, being attended to. These, I think, are, and these are the situations around which the sense of self is crystallized, and around, I think, around what all of our higher, a lot of our, well, just about all of our higher concepts. That's where they come into play. You have to, in order to know what the word sad means, you have to know a whole lot about, when it's appropriate to be sad, when somebody's joking, when they're really being sad, what it would mean to feel sad, and how people react to sad people. This all goes into sad, all goes into being, and only selves are not objects. They are first of all they're first of all entities that are in situations that are sad. And then you talk about selves after this, after have these, you've performed. The performative part of the self, I think, is most important before you have the clear boundary set up, that is, of the self that's really worried about holding up certain opinions of, yes, no, and being consistent, and being cogent, and being rational. These are all things that only come once things have broken down. They don't form out of ex nihilo. They form only, but they're formative. They probably, they feed back into our actions. You say, I am this kind of person or that kind of person. You make a commitment, but you already have to be in the web of commitments in order to have that become a formative principle. You say in Gestalt psychology, they have the formed and the formative. So if you're looking at a garden, you know the first row of potted plants might be the formative elements, the really important ones. Even though the whole garden uh, is your theme of your attention, there are certain elements which are formative, and there's certain that are formed, even though it's just one figure or theme on a background. So I mean, you have to think about formative elements versus formed elements. The background. What is the background for the self? The background usually has a sort of affective. Uh, there's a relevance, a principle of relevance that sort of holds a background together as a sort of affective unity, out of which the figure emerges, but which is it is nonetheless distinct from. Thanks.